Chapter 1243. I will send the address to Your Excellency's mobile phone later, and someone will bring Your Excellency here to inspect the goods. Remember to prepare the first deposit, Your Excellency. With that, Kuang hung up the phone. He was still wearing his white coat as he glanced at the computer screen and the subsequent reports. What he had planned hadn't happened. The important chess piece that should have called him at this time seemed to have gone missing. The large-scale trampling incident he had wanted to see was like a mist. It hadn't even appeared. What did this mean? Kuang knew it clearly. This meant that none of the hostages he had found would appear. The students hadn't come to the border. The off-road vehicle he had prepared had lost its purpose. At the start, Kuang had assumed that China was trying to calm the public, suppressing the news and not reporting it. But after he had received the news, he realized that someone had ruined his plans. Someone had ruined everything he had prepared for such a long time. Kuang's gaze gradually turned cold. His eyes were like a snake's, filled with a sinister aura. The sun in the MT region had always been bright. But no matter how bright the sun was, Scorpion could feel the anger emanating from the person in front of him. Bang! Kuang raised his gun, turning to shoot a bullet at one of the informants. Then he smiled. I never expected the person Qin Mo fancied to be so capable. But it doesn't matter, it's all thanks to him that we managed to obtain such useful information. With that, he hefted the communication device in his hand. Anyone who contacted the outside world would leave a record. He had purposely asked Fanjia to lower her standards. He hadn't expected to catch a rat. He wasn't sure who the message was sent to, but he was very interested in the contents. After all, the Chinese businessman had been mentioned. It seemed like the other party was very concerned about his business. Didn't this mean that there was something wrong with this group of people? Kuang's heart sank. He ordered his men to capture the person who had spread the news for the Chinese businessman. With one look he understood. Even though the person had denied colluding with anyone before his death, Kuang didn't believe him. Of course, he couldn't deny that the Chinese businessman was real. But if the other party was fake, Qin Mo might be inside. Kuang smiled, reaching out to wipe away the blood at the corner of his lips. If Qin Mo really existed, the exchange of information was extremely valuable. That's right, losing the student hostage was equivalent to losing half of the initiative. However, there was one thing that he had an absolute advantage over. He had already discovered the other party's identity, but the other party was still immersed in joy, thinking that everything was going smoothly. Kuang walked over to the table, looking at the image on the screen. Suddenly he broke into a smile. Compared to those students, you are the most valuable hostage. It's a pity I didn't manage to kidnap you back, but when Qin Mo comes, any news about you would be enough to turn him into a different person. Speaking of which, I have to thank you for letting me discover you in school. Fanjia didn't speak, because she couldn't be more familiar with that image. She had been looking for this person for such a long time, but she did not expect that her master would be the first one to meet her. This was like a slap to her face. Go and make a video. Kuang's voice was calm. He seemed to have finally adjusted his emotions. Wearing his white coat, he walked towards the computer screen. Use this footage and make some changes to the content. It's time for Qin Mo to have a second taste of what it feels like to lose something. If the Chinese businessman is really him, your video will come in handy. He didn't need to explain it clearly. Fanjia understood her master's intentions in the next second. Back then, she had pretended to be his childhood playmate to get close to him. She hadn't expected him to see through her in less than 10 days. But even so, they knew what his weakness was. They had to find that line of defense and destroy it completely, planting a psychological cue. Now her master was probably going to reactivate that psychological cue. If that was the case, that person's personality would change drastically and he would become one of them. With that thought, Fanjia couldn't suppress the smile on her face, her eyes glistening. I'll go and prepare now. On the cruise, after hanging up the phone, Prince kicked the chair in front of him away, his eyes filled with depression. Almost everyone present understood that feeling. Another comrade had been captured. He didn't even need to think to know what kind of cruel treatment he would receive from Kuang. It was impossible not to be furious. Right now, everyone was thinking about capturing that thug, Kuang. so that he wouldn't be able to do as he pleased in this world. There was only one person sitting on the chair, his long fingers tapping on the table as he listened to the recording of the phone call. After the third time, he removed his earphones, standing tall and handsome. Kwang is setting a trap for you. Every sentence is a test. From another angle, there is a problem. He is suspecting our identity, and you almost exposed yourself. Prince stilled, his eyes widening. He hadn't expected it to be so serious. He knew that Kwang was purposely provoking him, but he hadn't thought much about it. Now that he had heard Chin Mo's words, Prince felt sweat dripping down his forehead. Kwang was more unpredictable than they had imagined. If Kwang is really suspecting our identity, boss, are we still going for the deal? Magician felt uneasy. Chin Mo stood up. Don't forget what the mission is. It's normal for us to be suspected. Kwang is a suspicious person, and no one would immediately believe a Chinese person who has just entered the industry. Report the situation to the higher-ups. Fatty, check which special forces unit the captured soldiers belong to and which tourists are the hostages. We'll see how we can save them. Yes. The few of them split up, getting to work. The moment China received Chin Mo's news, they called for a meeting immediately. The atmosphere was tense. Whether to take action or not was a difficult decision to make. There were too many times when a decision had to be made, and it had to be made. If they hadn't received the news previously, they could have taken it as the Chinese tourists had all been massacred. But now they received the news. Kwang still had 17 ordinary tourists in his hands. The relatives of these tourists were all hoping for their return. They couldn't ignore such hopes. But at the same time, even though they knew Kwang was suspicious of Chin Mo and the others, they still sent the children to carry out the mission. They couldn't bear to do it. They were the top special forces in China. Their average age wasn't even 25 years old. Everyone knew that this was a mission that they might not be able to return from. General Chin wasn't the only one in the meeting. It was too difficult for them to make a decision. Indeed, it was too difficult. But all the spies had fallen. Now only this team was left. They were the closest to Kwang's lair. If they were fully prepared, they would be able to break the stalemate and lock onto Kwang's exact location. With the video evidence and the tourists still alive, they would be able to mobilize the foreign troops. But all of this required someone to go against Kwang. Otherwise, no one could be sure if the 17 tourists, including the spies that Kwang had captured, would still be alive. This was the situation everyone understood. At the same time, Bojio received 2 voice messages from young Master Tang. At this moment, Bojio was 500 kilometers away from the border. She drove the Lamborghini very fast, even exceeding the speed limit. Her eyes were unprecedentedly dark. Bojio was clear that even without this meeting, that person would have made the decision to save them. It was because of the clothes he was wearing. More importantly, he had said that the soldiers of China were born to save people. Little Blackie, Bojio turned and ordered. Help me get Hoshino's call. Yes, master. The navigation system changed and the internet connected automatically. The video wasn't a roadmap anymore. Instead, it was directed to a computer. The next moment, Hoshino's handsome face with a faint smile appeared in front of Bojio's eyes. He seemed to have just finished training. He was in his esports uniform, and there was a black earpiece on his ear. Bojio was used to seeing him in a sweater. Now that he had changed, it gave her a faint glow. It's rare that you would send me a video call directly. Hoshino, I need you to help me investigate a place. Bojio tilted her head. Her eyes were bright. Use the power of the entire hacker world. Hoshino paused. Then he smiled. I understand. I'm the only one here. The access is limited. Now connect to the regional network. Is it okay for me to log in with your account? It's okay. Bojio was straightforward. Hoshino's gaze turned warm. When Yusishin pushed the door open, this was the scene he saw. He didn't need to think to know who he was talking to. But Hoshino actually gestured for him to leave. Yusishin tied up his long hair. His sharp handsomeness made him exude a sense of coldness. Then he slammed the door. He didn't even want the cake he had bought. His long legs stepped on the pure black battle axe. The manager behind Yusishin was a little cautious. Young master, what's wrong? Isn't young Master Hoshino around? Why isn't he around? He's kissing his lover. He probably doesn't have time to care about you. Why? Do you want to test my driving skills? When Yusishin said this, the corners of his eyes turned cold. Such a man could really make people feel scared. The manager remembered the person who wanted to touch young Master's car. He broke one of his ribs. He hurriedly waved his hands. No, I'm just asking. Who did he offend? He felt so wronged. Yusishin didn't say anything. He glanced at the cake box that he had thrown. The more he looked at it, the more irritating he felt. He stepped on the accelerator. He was arrogant like a ball of fire. He didn't know who he would burn. Only young Master Hoshino could make the prince of the underworld reveal his emotions. The manager sighed. He didn't dare to ask why. Upstairs, Hoshino had already opened his laptop. Basically, as long as he had the young lord's instructions, it would be very easy to investigate a place. But the place they wanted to investigate today wasn't so easy to find. Because it was in the MT area, the ungoverned area of the Golden Triangle, everything became very complicated. First of all, this place wasn't developed. In addition, it was surrounded by dense forests. This meant that the communication here wasn't developed. In a place where communication wasn't developed, the internet wasn't widespread. To a hacker, in order to infiltrate a place, they had to have a network first. That way, it would be easier for them to operate. But here, because the network signal was too weak, in order to infiltrate, they had to find a suitable route. A few simple hackers definitely wouldn't be able to do it. But Bojio had said that they had to gather the power of the entire hacker world. This meant that this infiltration wasn't limited to one type of network. As long as there was a route, they would be able to infiltrate. But they still needed time, and it would take a long time. No one was sure if they would be able to find the place before their young lord arrived. Hoshino replied this question to Bojio. The next second, Bojio gave a solution. Try to start from the network operator. Starting from the network operator meant that as long as there was a signal, regardless of whether it was the main flow network or not, it would be detected. Many people said that hackers relied on their coding ability and hacking skills. That was indeed true. But there was another point that people often neglected. That was the thought process to infiltrate. A correct thought process to infiltrate could save a lot of time. And to a hacker, time was the deciding factor. With Bojio's thought process, hackers from all over the world quickly integrated the information and deleted it. In the end, it landed on a region. This region was west of the Mekong River. It was the largest natural forest. The last piece of information regarding Kawang had come from this place. Chapter 1244. Unless someone can destroy the signal interference equipment, Bojio interrupted Hoshino. She turned the steering wheel with one hand, her eyes as dark as the night sky. Hoshino, thank you. When he heard the last few words, Hoshino knew Bojio's decision. Similarly, he knew that as an assistant, he had to prepare everything. I will get someone to prepare the equipment for you before you enter the forest. But that place has always been heavily guarded. Our spies won't stay there for long. You will have to go to the designated location to get it. As Hoshino spoke, he had already entered the regional network. The hacker aristocrat clan sounded simple. But in reality, when you got to know them, you would realize that they never lacked manpower. This was arranged by the old steward. As long as there were people, there would be a supply point. This was the rule of the underworld. Any organization would obtain the information they needed from the hacker aristocrat clan. Correspondingly, they had to provide a certain level of protection. Of course, they wouldn't care about life and death, but they would always be conservative when it came to equipment. This was an unspoken understanding. In the past, there had been people who felt that the hacker aristocrat clan was just impressive on the internet. They were probably useless in real life. They wanted to break the rules and not provide the equipment needed to end the hacker aristocrat clan. Such an organization disappeared in front of everyone's eyes in less than a week. The hacker aristocrat clan sold information, but that didn't mean that they were weak. Everyone knew what kind of person the young lord of the hacker aristocrat was. Unless they had no other choice, they would never offend Z. After all, Everyone helping each other out was what everyone in the underworld wanted to see. This was the same in the MT region. Just as Bojio drove towards the direction of the forest, the Supreme Council had made a decision, and the operation continued. This was Qin Mo's suggestion, because he knew very well what the current situation was. Perhaps every Special Forces soldier had been prepared for this from the very beginning. Regardless of what awaited them in front of them, they had to learn how to overcome it. If the mission was too dangerous, they wouldn't go for the rescue. That would probably go against the original intention of wearing this uniform. Qin Mo lifted his lids and looked at his soldier. None of them had any intention of not going. When they had heard that Kuang had Chinese compatriots, their first reaction had been to think of a way to save them. Qin Mo used a pen to draw an area on the map. According to the analysis of the information, Kuang would usually choose his old nest for a deal. The most important thing now is that no one knows the exact location of Kuang's old nest. Hence, we need to stall for time during the negotiation. The signal can't be detected? Fatty frowned. How are we going to retreat? Chapter 1245. He wanted him to show his fear towards the Devil King? Prince thought that it was too easy. However, he had never thought that he would have such an elder brother. Prince tried to put himself in the role of the little black boy. He felt that his boss might be strict, but at least he doted on his younger brother. Hence, he should be able to do whatever he wanted to. But reality proved that Prince was too naive. Just as he was about to give the devil a hug to show his brother's happiness, his boss glanced over. Boss glanced over with a cold gaze that made one's scalp numb. There's no need for physical contact. Prince glared. Then how are we going to show our brotherly love? I'll suppress you harshly. It's a sign of brotherhood, Qin Mo replied slowly. Prince. He had been living in his fantasy for one more minute. His boss wasn't like this when he was with the little black boy. He would bring him water or carry sweets in his pocket. He would smile and pat his head whenever they didn't agree. Why was he suppressing him harshly? Check your belongings. Qin Mo glanced over, his long fingers tapping on the table. According to Kuang's personality, he won't let us reach our destination directly. From the map, we have to take a boat first. Before that, we will have to alight from our own car and be blindfolded. Our belongings might be detected. Hence, we have to be careful and change all internal communication devices to watches. Wear a coat, especially the one Prince is wearing. Magician, from today onwards, you will have a habit. Magician was still in a daze. Qin Mo had already prepared a poker card for him. You play poker all the time. Magic should be easy for you. Magician glanced at the ace of hearts in his hand. He understood what his boss meant. Poker cards could be used as a hidden weapon. He couldn't bring a fully formed weapon. He could only bring something unexpected and defensive. Fatty, you will be in charge of tracking. Once we meet up with Kuang's men, you can't follow anymore. Remember to lock onto our location and maintain a 24-hour link with the troops. Yes. Qin Mo's words could be heard from the conference room. There were still 3 hours before the meeting time Kuang had said. They could only make sufficient preparations within a limited time. Kuang was already suspicious of them, and the moment they moved time, his suspicions would only increase. Therefore, this operation more or less depended on luck. In terms of disguise, there was no need to worry. Magician's makeup skills were on par with Bojio's. In less than half an hour, Qin Mo's face had undergone a drastic change. He didn't look like he used to. Instead, he looked more like young Master Qin. However, he looked more imposing. He had a short beard on his face and looked very manly. Coupled with the knife scar at the corner of his eye, he didn't look like young Master Qin anymore. In addition, Qin Mo's natural aura made Prince feel that his boss had entered the wrong profession. He seemed more like a big boss than a gangster. At the starting point, the hour hand pointed to 3. Chapter 1246. Prince paused for a moment. Qin Mo glanced up, gesturing for him to pick up the call. Prince pressed the answer button. Kuang's laughter could be heard. He sounded extremely refined. I'm really sorry. I received news that someone leaked our meeting location. I'm investigating what exactly went wrong. Leaked? How was that possible? Prince instinctively wanted to deny it. Chin Emo moved his fingers, indicating for him to cancel today's meeting. Cancel? Prince thought he had misread the gesture, but when he glanced at his boss's face, he knew what to say. But when she looked at her boss's face again, she knew what to say. Since there's a problem, let's not meet up for now. Find out who leaked the news and kill them. I have so many connections here. If someone finds out that my family met up with you, I'll be the one in trouble. My brother definitely won't forgive me. He's beside me right now. He was just scolding me, saying that I don't have a brain. You're being too serious. Don't worry, as long as you don't leak the information, everything will be safe. Kwang seemed to be implying something, but at this moment he smiled. But you can't go to the meeting location I sent you previously. I'll send you another address. Prince didn't agree immediately, instead he was worried. Are you sure it's fine? You can ask around, there won't be any problems if you're serious about working with me. Kwang smiled faintly. Prince's tone was one of complete trust. Alright, send me the address, I'll head over with my brother. Alright. Kwang hung up, the smile on his face not fading. Scorpion heaved a sigh of relief. He had been worried that King would trick the other party. After all, the other party was someone he wanted to work with. If there was a problem on the way, he wouldn't be in a good position. After all, Scorpion knew very well that no one had said that the news of their meeting had been leaked. King's intention in making this call was very obvious. He wanted to naturally change the meeting location and disrupt the other party's rhythm. Only then would he know if there was a problem with them. Until now, the other party's reaction has been the same as a buyer, including his worry. Kwang's gaze dimmed. Take the call first. I won't believe it unless we meet face to face. Yes. Scorpion accepted the order and began to make preparations. On the other side, Prince broke out in a cold sweat again. He finally realized that Kwang had been bluffing him. If he had said that it was impossible, it wouldn't have suited his identity as a buyer. Buyers would be more concerned about whether the transaction was really safe, whether the supply was good enough, and how the price and benefits would be. Kwang's words hinted at the question. Perhaps only boss would be able to respond at the first moment. Prince finally understood why his boss was the only one who could complete this mission. Other than their boss, anyone who came would lose to Kwang in terms of psychological testing. In the end, they would all be wiped out. The change in location once again showed how suspicious Kwang was of them. Chin Emo knew that the other party wanted to catch them off guard, so he was especially calm and adjusted his state of mind. He didn't mess up his initial plan. As usual, they drove 3 cars out. Fatty's car was especially low-key, and after the first 2 cars drove out, he didn't immediately follow. Since they were in the MT area, Chin Emo would definitely consider spies. Boss, there's a car following us in the 9 o'clock direction. Hunter turned the steering wheel, turning to look at the reflection in the rearview mirror. He frowned. Chin Emo seemed to be resting. Normal, continue driving. Fatty, is there anyone following you? No, according to boss, we set off 3 minutes later. It's really peaceful, Fatty replied as he adjusted the rearview mirror back to its original position. He looked at the order of the cars on the viaduct. Chin Emo and the others were the first to pass, followed by the people Kwang had sent to watch them. Finally, it was Fatty. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. It seemed magical, but it was also mentally taxing. The person sitting in the car. Only Doctor knew why his boss's every move was so precise. From the moment the phone rang, he had been constantly writing about Kwang's psychological profile. Everything looked very peaceful. But in reality, boss's battle had started earlier than them. Doctor wasn't worried that his boss would be wrong in this aspect. He was worried about his boss's psychological state. Swoosh. The car door opened. Someone walked over. It was Scorpion. It was enough to show Kwang's sincerity by sending Scorpion over. Scorpion had assumed that the person sitting in the boss seat would be the familiar Prince. He hadn't expected it to be someone else. He arched a brow. Who is this? Prince glanced at his boss fearfully. Compared to his usual self, he seemed more restrained. My brother. Scorpion was enlightened. At the same time, he understood something. The real boss had arrived. Hello, I'm Scorpion. I've heard of your name. Scorpion stretched his hand out. Chinemo was natural, not bothering to conceal his powerful aura. I've heard about you from Consultant. Scorpion was even more certain that there wouldn't be any unpleasantness in this collaboration. Why didn't I see Consultant today? There are some accounts that I need him to check. I see. Scorpion didn't ask further. He lifted the black cloth in his hand. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble everyone to cooperate. Chinemo didn't agree immediately, his impatience obvious. He even frowned. What's the meaning of this? Sometimes, the stronger your attitude, the softer the other party's attitude. Scorpion was like that. From his point of view, Chinemo was rich and knew how to do business. In the future, the benefits from their collaboration would be huge. He couldn't offend him over such a small matter. The checks have been strict recently. According to the rules of the underworld, the first time you enter, there are too many things planted inside. If the location is known, everything will be gone. Please understand. Scorpion was ruthless when he was sinister, but when he wasn't, he was good with words. This type of person had to be careful. It wasn't without reason that Kwang had sent him. Chapter 1247. Scorpion heard the warning and immediately said, "Of course, once we earn money in the future, we will all be on the same side. Sorry for offending you this time." His words were polite, but Scorpion's wrist was firm. He lifted the black cloth and wrapped it 3 more times. Everyone was now in a state of darkness. They couldn't see anything. They couldn't even see the scanning rod when it passed by, but they could still feel it. Especially Chinemo. He knew what was going on even when he was standing there. The person in charge of scanning shook his head at Scorpion, implying that there was no problem. Scorpion didn't speak. He raised his hand and pointed at his ear. The person in charge of scanning understood and pretended to sweep past Chinmo's ear, but in reality, he was checking for a small Bluetooth earpiece. The alarm didn't sound, which meant everything was normal. Scorpion laughed. Come, I'll get in first." The 5 of them were arranged in a commercial car, and Wolf was holding the deposit in his hand. Even though he was blindfolded, Chinmo's aura was so strong that it was hard to ignore him. Scorpion was very satisfied, and he gestured to the driver. What he didn't notice was Chinemo, who was leaning sideways, tapped lightly on his watch. The signal was activated. Fatty immediately placed his fingers on the keyboard and typed furiously in order to lock onto the position of the red dot. Finally, Fatty heaved a sigh of relief, moving towards the red dot. At the start, he didn't think much of it, but after walking for a while, he realized they were going in circles. Fatty was still worried about how to inform his boss. Actually, there wasn't a need to inform him, because Chinemo had already sensed Scorpion leading them in circles. Perhaps other Special Forces soldiers wouldn't be outstanding even if they were trained in this area. But for Chinemo, observing his surroundings was his forte as a criminal psychologist. It wasn't just through images, but also through sounds and senses. The same hawker had floated over 3 times. Besides, it wasn't just the hawker, the number of turns was the same as well. Chinemo tilted his head. Blindfolded, he looked extremely harmless. But in reality, both the military doctor and magician knew. Once they entered mission mode, their boss wouldn't stop his analysis. After all, time was tight to make a deal. Scorpion took another detour, but it was only a small one. Soon the car stopped. "Sorry to trouble you, sir. I need to change my mode of transportation." Scorpion was also very careful with his words, and would not reveal any information. However, it was not difficult to tell where they were. The smell of water was strong. In addition, when they lifted their legs, there was a shaking sound. It was obvious that they were on a boat. A rattling sound rang out. Chinemo could tell that it was the sound of a small speedboat's engine with just one listen. It seemed that they were very close to their destination. Chinemo moved his fingers. When the speedboat started moving, the water splashed onto his hair. Separated by the black cloth, he looked calm as though he was a guest. This completely dispelled Scorpion's suspicions. However, there was a problem on Fatty's side. Suddenly, there was a network error notification. 1 second ago, Fatty was still using the network to track the signal, and the red dot was still at the address he had locked onto. The next second, the red dot had disappeared. Chapter 1248. The signal was cut off. Fatty wasn't the only one whose expression changed because of the sudden danger. Even the people sitting in the meeting room clenched their fists. This time, the operation team was truly alone and without help. Even after giving the highest order and gathering everyone's strength, including the national defense, they still couldn't reconnect the signal. When Chin Emo realized that there was no signal, it was already 10 minutes later. After all, he was blindfolded and the others weren't talking, so he really couldn't notice the abnormality on his watch. It was just that the previous few times when the message was transmitted, the watch would vibrate slightly. This time it didn't. Chin Mo's eyes dimmed. Listening to the sound of the speedboat gliding past his ears, his emotions didn't change at all. The military doctor also knew that they had boarded the boat. Every Special Force soldier had the ability to sense the flow of water, let alone this group of people. But only the military doctor knew that any sound of water, especially in such an environment, could easily leave a psychological impression on Chin Emo. Whenever it rained, his boss's mood would be extremely bad. It wasn't without reason. The shadow that day on his boss still existed. The military doctor was even worried that it was related to the psychological suggestion. Time passed slowly. There was no progress in the meeting room. Fatty tried his best to think of a way, but still couldn't lock onto the target. In the end, there was news that there was signal interference equipment inside. The radiation range was very wide, which was why it was easy for the plane to lose direction in this vicinity. In addition, when looking down, other than the complicated river below, there was only lush jungle. It was difficult to see the state of the situation inside, so there was no way to provide any support. The operation team had lost contact for half an hour. No one could predict what would happen in this half an hour. No news at this time might be the best news. The position of the sun moved down a little, and the surrounding scenery also changed. It had to be said that this place was really beautiful, but that kind of beauty seemed to hide danger. The river narrowed. Not far away, there were mercenaries with guns in their hands. Some sat on the boat, some stood on the shore, as if they were patrolling. Unexpectedly, some of them were young. Even the youngest was only 10 years old. Perhaps this was the real Golden Triangle. Because it was a lawless area. And because it wasn't peaceful, even children would carry guns. They were not poor. Even if stacks of money were to pass by them, they might not even blink. This place was rich in poppies. Everyone knew that there was no business in the world that could bring in money faster than poppies. What they lack is love. They didn't have parents, and even if they did, they were just slaves. He had been raised by Kwang's side since he was young, and was different from the other children. Their eyes were even colder than ordinary people's. This was the scene that Prince saw when his blindfold was removed. He stood there in a daze, unable to believe his eyes. Scorpion stood to the side and laughed. "Welcome to our paradise. From here on out, no one will be able to disturb our cooperation." Chapter 1249. Scorpion lifted his chin, gesturing for him to look into the depths of the forest. Chin Emo tilted his head. The first thing he saw were two metal tower-like buildings. Every Special Forces soldier had received training in this area. Some reacted slowly while others reacted quickly. Chin Emo took a glance and understood what it was. It was a signal interference tower. Not bad. He put one hand into his trouser pocket and said slowly, "In this way, our cooperation will be more secure." Scorpion laughed. "Boss Rong, you know your stuff." Prince's gaze was still on the children. Scorpion noticed it, turning his head over. "Why? Second young master hasn't seen them before?" Prince admitted carelessly. "They are so young, I haven't seen them before. Do they know how to shoot?" Second young master Rong, don't underestimate them. The corners of Scorpion's lips curled up slowly. Sometimes, they are the most useful when dealing with Special Forces trying to sneak in. Prince tried his best to look natural. "Are you serious?" "Of course." Scorpion sized him up. Second young master's expression when he looks at them is similar to the expressions of Special Forces soldiers. But the difference is that second young master doesn't look like a Special Forces soldier. Prince didn't move. Qin Emo spoke up at this moment. That's why I let him come out to see the world. He is well protected at home. My brother's biggest flaw is that he isn't ruthless enough. With that, Qin Emo glanced at Prince. That glance made Scorpion give up on some thoughts. After all, the second son of some families was indeed like that. Moreover, he was a rich fool. He smiled. Boss Rong, this way please. Qin Emo didn't say anything else. He stuffed a hand into his pocket, walking past the two boys who were gambling with their guns. His aura was as strong as ever. Prince was startled. He understood that his reaction just now might have been seen through. He immediately returned to his role, reaching out to touch the bridge of his nose. Just like a useless nouveau riche, he followed behind Qin Emo. Every scene made one's heart skip a beat. There was even a sense of repulsion towards this place from the bottom of their hearts. Scorpion called this place heaven, but in Prince's eyes, it was no different from hell. Although it is sunny and beautiful, but the things these children did made people feel a chill run down their spines. Magician, who was standing at the side, felt the same way. It wasn't because of the children, but because after seeing the building, they understood why their boss had asked Scorpion that question. Firstly, it was to lower Scorpion's guard, and secondly, it was to tell them that there was no signal here. All of their communication would have to be done through other means. From now on, they would not have any external help. Keeping himself alive and not exposing his identity was more important than anything else. Who would have thought that Kuang would hide in such a place? There was even a checkpoint on the river. Most importantly, if they continued to head east, they would reach the border of China. This was what the entire operation team was most concerned about, including Qin Mo. Because they would absolutely not tolerate any person or organization growing stronger day by day in a place so close to Huaxia. Eyeing covetously like a tiger watching its prey, on the other side of the river, on a small road 50 kilometers away, a black Lamborghini roared past. It wasn't strange to see luxurious cars here, but most of them drove off-road vehicles, not this model. The AI system had already issued 3 consecutive warnings. When little Blackie predicted the next slope, he reminded the driver sincerely, "Master, slow down really, I'm so handsome, if I drag the bottom, it would look like a pair of leather shoes opening its mouth, it would be an awkward scene." Bojo arched a brow, not intending to be gentle. Little Blackie could only activate the self-rescue function when the bottom of the car came into contact with the huge pit. In the end there was still a little smoke, but fortunately, it wasn't injured internally. As a broken car that relied on its looks to survive till now, it wasn't easy. Bojo ignored little Blackie's next words. Bojo opened the car door, walking into a mobile market. She wasn't sure if it was because of the environment. Many of them had broken arms and legs. Bojo could roughly guess why they were in such a state. Here, those who weren't willing to sell drugs would have their arms or legs broken. Now, the shadows of the flowers could no longer be seen. They had all turned into villages and crops. But the sales of drugs didn't decrease. It was probably because there was a need. There was a market. Those who took drugs out of curiosity or other reasons. They would never know that there were some people who lived at the edge of hell. They wouldn't compromise for something in their hearts. They knew better than anyone else how much destruction this thing could bring to a family. Hence, even if they had their arms and legs broken, they didn't want to participate. Who could understand their feelings? They weren't soldiers, they weren't even Chinese. They were ordinary citizens. All of them hoped that they had never harmed anyone. Sometimes, the heavens would give some people the best living environment. But those people didn't have a shred of conscience. Those who live at the bottom of society can emit light in their eyes. Because of this, that was why they wanted to destroy the hell that Kuang had created. Bojo raised her hand, lifting a black curtain. Sometimes, what people lacked the most was medicine. Behind the black curtain, there would usually be a Mongolian doctor. This time, he was the one who provided the medicine to Bojo. The moment Bojo entered, he moved back and forth. "Honestly, I really didn't want to prepare these for you. You should know that if you go against Kuang here, You will have to collect your corpse tomorrow. But after some thought, going against you hackers isn't going to end well either, after all. Bojio's expression turned serious. She looked at Bojio and said, "That's right, I didn't want to prepare these for you." With that, the Mongolian doctor suddenly paused, his eyes brightening as he looked at Bojio. Why are you here?" Bojio paused. "We don't know each other, right?" She definitely had an impression of such a unique breed. "Also, you put the cold medicine and diarrhea medicine together." Oh, the medicine is the same," he replied seriously. Chapter 1250. That's not right. This isn't the time for that. The Mongolian doctor was still wearing his mask when he placed the medicine down. "I've seen you play before, you're so handsome. Why aren't you competing? Why are you here? Don't tell me you aren't going to compete. I've already bought the tickets for the Asian Cup. I'm telling you. If you aren't participating, I'll kill the tickets." "Bojio." The Mongolian doctor paused before adding shyly, "I'm your fan." Bojio was thinking about how to reply. The Mongolian doctor introduced himself once more. "The moment your name appears on the livestream platform, I'll appear and I'll be the one who receives the most gifts." Bojio replied calmly, "You've got the wrong person." "I've got the wrong person?" The Mongolian doctor removed his mask. "Don't underestimate the power of fans. Wait a minute. Your skin has indeed turned darker, and your nose isn't as straight as before. Is this the effect of breaking away from your fantasy? No, that's not right. Isn't it a disguise? F***ck. Why am I so dumb? It's definitely a disguise. You probably won't need the paint I prepared for you. It'll save on costs." Bojio smiled. "You call that saving?" "I'm saving it for your gifts," the Mongolian doctor replied confidently. Bojio thought, "You might as well give me something more practical." In the end, she knocked on the table. "Give me the things." The Mongolian doctor became more reliable when it came to serious matters. "It's all here. I'll give you something else. Most importantly, God K. When you head out later, go for a stroll so Kwang won't be able to lock onto me. I'll use these 2 days to leave. I'll give you the medicine for free. There are too many poisonous snakes in the forest. It's better to be prepared." Bojio swept a glance at the medicine box, smiling. "I won't need the sulfur. Do you have anesthetics? Give me a dozen needles." The Mongolian doctor was cooperative, but he did not expect his idol to take away all his belongings. After a moment, he turned towards her back view. "Honestly, you should return to Supreme Alliance. It doesn't matter if you're a girl. Take me for example. After I found out you're a girl, my first reaction was to marry you. I just don't know if you have a boyfriend." "I do." This was the first time Bojio had answered the Mongolian doctor's question. She seemed to have thought of someone, her lips curling into a smile. "He's great. I'm planning to propose to him." The Mongolian doctor was stunned. Not only did he suddenly fall out of love, he was also fed a wave of dog food. "You're a girl. Why are you proposing?" Bojio couldn't hear the Mongolian doctor's cries in his heart. After all the preparations were done, the car sped off the accelerator. No matter what, she wanted to find the Almighty and send him back to Jiang City. Just like what the Mongolian doctor said, there was still an Asian competition waiting for them in Rivertown. Not for anyone, but for himself. Only in the esports arena. That was the true joy of that person. There are still 20 kilometers to the destination. A river has been detected ahead. Do you want to change your form? Xiao Hei's voice came over. Bojio swung her tail. Change. Chapter 1251. When the number 1 appeared, Bojio's right hand moved. She shifted the gears and accelerated. She held onto the steering wheel and drove the car into the water. Everyone knew that once a car entered the river, the water would rush over from all directions, seeping through the gaps in the glass. Within a few seconds, the car would be completely filled with water, and the entire car would sink, as if it was submerged from top to bottom. The people inside wouldn't be able to escape. However, the moment the car entered the water, there was an obvious change to the car window. As the entire car was submerged, there was a loud rumble. The Lamborghini's bat-like door retracted and the tires changed directions. It was as though the car was sliding. Even though the appearance didn't change, the function was completely different. It wasn't just waterproof, it had its own propeller. The movement of the water was enough to propel the car forward. The headlights in front were 5 times brighter than usual. This way, even in the water, they would be able to see the road in front clearly. Status change complete. Switch to water mode. Travel distance is 40 miles. Sufficient fuel. The detected problem is the water pressure is unstable. Manual propulsion is required. The smart navigation system fluctuated one curve after another. Boju leaned back and looked up. She pressed the button on the sunroof and the hidden propeller rose. Accelerate. 2 words came out of her mouth. The smart navigation system responded to the corresponding force. The propeller spun faster and faster. The speed was almost twice as fast as before. The fish that were still swimming in the water dispersed. They didn't understand why such a huge fellow would enter their territory. Time trickled by. It was 4 p.m. in the afternoon. The sun shone down and pushed aside the thick fog. There was a vast expanse of flat land. The moment they reached the riverbank, Scorpion arranged for them to board an off-road vehicle. The only difference was that this time, they weren't blindfolded. Because of this, the Crown Prince felt it even more deeply. This place was too beautiful. It was indescribably beautiful. There was a sea of flowers in full bloom. At the end of it was a straw hut. It was a place that could be called a fairyland. But because of the species of the sea of flowers, it became a bone-chilling sight. Poppy, the raw material for all drugs. When he walked in, Scorpion was still smiling. Don't smell too much, the pollen here is too strong. You'll get addicted if you smell too much. Prince's fingers were stiff because the smell was too strong. It was so strong that he felt uneasy from the bottom of his heart. Chinemo placed his hand on the edge of the car window. His hair was blown by the wind. He seemed to be enjoying it. Is that so? It should be very comfortable to sleep in such a place. Mr. Rong has the same idea as our king. Scorpion seemed to be surprised that the other party would say something like that. But on second thought, most vicious and merciless people wouldn't care if the things around them would harm others. After all, in their eyes, profit was the most important thing. Scorpion thought of this and smiled. Only then would he be worthy of being their partner. However, Scorpion did not know. From the moment they approached the Sea of Flowers, Prince, Magician and the rest subconsciously held their breaths to a certain extent. He quietly held his breath. Chapter 1252. Scorpion drove the off-road vehicle into a courtyard not far from the Sea of Flowers. He stopped the car. On the other side, a row of mercenaries stood in front of them. They had tattoos on their faces, and they held guns in their hands. Their expressions were fierce. This was probably a characteristic of this place. The perennial sunlight made their skin tanned, and they looked like outlaws. Only the person in the middle was different. That was Fangjia. But today, she didn't reveal her face. Instead, she wore a cloak and stood there, hiding her appearance. The other person was wearing a suit, and looked to be in his 50s. He held a walking stick in his hand, and looked over as though he had been waiting for Chin-mo. When Prince saw that person, he clenched his fists instinctively. Magician and the others were the same. Only Chin-mo's gaze was calm. He didn't look at that person. Instead, he glanced over and paused on a man in a white coat. This is our king. Scorpion introduced. King, this is Boss Rong. The man with the walking stick reached his hand out. Hello. Chin-mo lifted the corner of his lips. No one knew what he was thinking. His gaze deepened. I've heard a lot about you. Come please. The man reached out and led Chin-mo into the house. The moment he entered the room, Chin-mo could smell the fragrance of poppies. Sir, you really know how to enjoy yourself, Chin-mo said when he sat down. The man laughed. Boss Rong knows his stuff. I'm used to this fragrance and sleep well at night. The man took out a cigar and passed it to Chin-mo. Want one? The moment he said that, Prince wanted to clench his fists. Prince wanted to clench his fists instinctively. After all, everyone knew that in a place like this, things like cigarettes couldn't be accepted because no one knew what was inside. But before he could react, Chin Mo had already taken a puff. Chin Mo was already smoking a cigar. He tossed one to him and said, "Test it." Prince didn't have time to react as he took the cigar. The man narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Rong, what do you mean? Even though I do business in this area, I don't touch such things." Chin Mo crossed his legs, his aura strong. "Sir, what do you mean by giving me this? Doubt my identity? Then can I also suspect sir's identity? Are you really Kuang?" The man paused, as if he hadn't expected him to be so direct. Moreover, this person didn't look like a soldier, nor was he sent by any department. However, the aura of a gangster was very strong. What was he going to say next? That person had no idea what to do. His gaze drifted in a certain direction. At this moment, even Prince could tell that there was something wrong with Kuang. Why did he keep looking at a family doctor? Just as the question popped up in his head, a voice entered his ears. "Boss Rong, you have a good eye." The family doctor walked out from inside. He was wearing a white coat and a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. He looked very gentle, and even had an indescribable elegance. Chapter 1253. This was Kuang. Prince seemed to have understood something, glancing up at the family doctor. At this moment he was already seated in his seat, facing Chin Mo. The person in disguise stood up, standing at the side respectfully. In that instant, doctor and magician's hearts were in their throats. Even though their boss had changed drastically in terms of appearance, even Fan Jia hadn't been able to recognize him. But Kuang wasn't Fan Jia. Other than being scheming, he was also a top criminal psychologist. When such a person was trying to identify others, they would not rely on their appearance to identify them. In this aspect, Chin Mo was the same. People like them were usually best at observing each other's details. For example, their actions, the way they spoke, even the minute movements when they drank water would be fatal. The reason why Kuang didn't show himself was because he had a plan from the start. He wanted to observe them in the dark. It was a pity that the people on his side weren't able to keep their composure. Kuang glanced up, sweeping a glance at the vicious face in front of him. Then he smiled. "Open the cigars, it'll be easier to inspect the goods." "Yes." Scorpion reached for a cigar, slicing it with a knife. Other than the tobacco, there was white powder inside. Chin Mo smiled playfully. "No wonder you don't have to worry about being investigated when doing business with sir. Such packaging is natural. That's normal." Kuang chuckled, raising the teapot and pouring a cup for Chin Mo. "I like Chinese calligraphy the most, but my skills are limited. In the past, I had a student who was good at calligraphy. It's a pity that he didn't follow me, but he made me very interested in Chinese culture, so." Kuang smiled. Lifting the teapot to pour a cup for Chin Mo, Kuang paused. Fan Jia passed him a ballpoint pen. Kuang reached out and broke it open. It was all fine white powder. Prince gritted his teeth as he watched from the side, but he couldn't show any hint of anger. He actually used stationery to transport goods. However, doctor and magician were thinking about something else. Could the student that Kuang was referring to be? In that instant, doctor's heart sank. What did Kuang mean? Had he seen through their boss's identity? Otherwise, why would he deliberately mention his student? His thoughts were disrupted. The military doctor knew that the current situation was very dangerous. He shouldn't follow her train of thought. However, those who studied psychology would usually be more sensitive than ordinary people. His thoughts were like this now. Then the boss would definitely be more complicated. Kuang hadn't confirmed his boss's identity, and was just testing him. Boss's next reply was crucial. Not a bad idea. Chin Mo took the ballpoint pen and sized it up. Seeing this, I thought of a better idea. Instantly, Kuang's sinister gaze lessened. He arched a brow. "Oh, what is it?" "The correction fluid is safer than this." Chin Mo tossed the pen aside, his aura thickening. Chapter 1254. Watch a movie. How could Kuang be in such a good mood? The military doctor looked at his boss worriedly. But Kuang didn't seem to be asking for anyone's opinion. With a raise of his hand, his men had already changed the setting in the living room. And where they were sitting, they were facing the screen. If they stood up and left now, their previous efforts would be in vain. They already had so much information. As long as they reached a place with a signal, they would be able to send out the exact location. The main force would arrive soon and completely destroy this hell-like place. But Kwang wasn't easy to deal with. Now, what was his purpose in doing this? Doctor couldn't figure it out. That was why he wasn't confident. Kwang sat on the chair and raised his wine glass. I wonder what kind of movies Boss Rong likes to watch. I personally like anti-reconnaissance movies, so I made the decision to choose this one. Boss Rong, don't be in a hurry to leave, such a good show isn't easy to come by. Oh, is that so? Chin Mo arched a brow, a nonchalant expression on his face. Sir's introduction does pique my interest. Kwang laughed. You might like it since the main character is a good choice. The more he acted like this, the more suspicious Doctor was. His boss couldn't possibly not know that Kwang didn't come with good intentions. Was he testing him? The last test? Doctor tightened his fists, his thoughts unreadable. Even someone as insensitive as Prince could tell that the movie invitation wasn't simple. He looked at the atmosphere between the two of them, especially the smile on Kwang's face. No matter how one looked at it, it was as sinister as a venomous snake. Even though he gave off a refined vibe, at the west side by the shore, a rustling sound could be heard. The patrolling mercenary frowned. He carried his rifle and walked towards the bushes. The moment he stepped in, before he could raise his rifle, a figure flew down from the tree, a needle plunging into his neck. It was a fatal blow. The mercenary opened his mouth, looking at the youngster on the ground. His breathing stopped abruptly. Bojio pulled him to the shore. Under the layers of banana leaves, a car door was revealed. Her movements were very fast. She took off the person's clothes and put them back on in less than a minute. The network has been completely blocked. I can't contact the outside world, and the outside world can't contact us either. I won't be able to lock onto Master's location, so when Master moves, you must be careful. Little Black will wait for you to come back. Bojio didn't waste her breath. She reached out and patted Little Blackie's car door. Then she moved the banana leaves back. When she turned around again, she had already changed her appearance. She was wearing a mercenary uniform, and her face was covered with a mask. In order to make the effect more realistic, she even got a one-time tattoo at the corner of her eye. Other than the gun in her hand and the 4 syringes in her pocket, she had no other weapons. But that was all they could do, because they wanted to sneak in and destroy the signal tower. Therefore, they had to travel light and not bring anything. Chapter 1255. Bojio knew she was at the periphery. She had to head in. Bojio lifted her head, glancing towards the signal jamming tower 3 kilometers away. However, in the next second, his figure paused for a moment. There were poppies everywhere, swaying along with the wind. It was beautiful, but it gave off a strong sense of danger. After all, it was hard to concentrate if one smelled too much of the pollen. Since the network signal couldn't be used, the laptop was useless. Of course, it wasn't certain. There were still loopholes in the network. Bojio reached for the communication cable and the black earpiece she had taken from the mercenary. Her eyes dimmed. But in a place with a signal jamming tower, hacking into the network would be easily discovered. This was what she had done. Of course, she wouldn't fall into such a trap. Based on the time, the Almighty should have met up with Kwang. If they found out that someone had infiltrated the group, the Almighty's disguise would be exposed. Bojio tilted her head. Besides, there were many ways to stop the signal jamming tower. Hacking wasn't the only way. She had to shut down the signal jamming tower without exposing the Almighty's identity. That way, the investigation team would have enough time to lock onto the exact location. Bojio believed the Almighty had other plans in mind. That was why she was sure there would be an investigation team not far from here. They should have stopped at the place where they couldn't find the Almighty. Even though she was worried, she couldn't search recklessly because the moment she did, the entire mission would be in vain. Kwang would take the chance to escape, just like the previous time. Hence, she couldn't give Kwang another chance. She had to confirm the location before closing in quietly. That way, Kwang would be caught off guard. You must be thinking the same thing. Brother Mo. Bojio glanced up, plugging her earpiece. Her slender figure was about to move when a voice came from behind her. A voice came from behind. Hey you, who are you in charge of? Why are you here? Bojio turned with her gun, speaking in the local language. I'm here to relieve myself. My head hurts from looking at those farmers. Don't be too relaxed. King has instructed us not to make any mistakes today. That person glanced at Bojio, but didn't say much. He grabbed his gun and went somewhere else. After all, he had never imagined that someone would disguise as one of them and infiltrate their ranks. In addition, Kuang had locked up all the spies and suspected spies yesterday. That meant that there was nothing wrong with the rest. Therefore, that person's guard wasn't very high. What's more, they were inspecting the surface of the water within a 50-kilometer radius. Since the alarm didn't go off, it was even less likely that someone would sneak in. After all, there wasn't even a ship in sight. However, who knew? Bojio didn't walk on the surface, but under the water. Bojio's gaze deepened as she reached out to pull down the towel. She lifted her legs and walked behind him. Bojio wouldn't make a move. Because of her voice in my ear. Number 7. What happened to number 7? Speak. I just went to the toilet. Next time when you go to the toilet, keep the communication line open. What's the situation on your side? Everything is normal. Bojio pushed the syringe back into her pocket. Every mercenary here had a Bluetooth earpiece. If one of the Bluetooth earpieces didn't receive a reply, the main communication room would be alerted. Hence, unless it was absolutely necessary, she wouldn't make a move to get rid of him. This way, it would increase the difficulty of her infiltration. It was impossible for there to be no one guarding the signal shielding tower's engine room. It seemed like she could only make use of the time difference. She had to find out how often they would question her. Once she reached the engine room, she would definitely hurt someone. Only by controlling the engine room would she be able to prevent the signal shielding tower from detection, even if it was shut down. Hence, the timing of her attack was crucial. Bojio tilted her head, a pair of dark eyes glistening. Her guess was right. Perhaps it was because he knew a person too well that he could even guess the other party's thoughts. Qin Mo had chosen this method to get close to Kuang, because he wanted to drag him out. While they were discussing business, the troops would be able to accurately lock onto Kuang's location, and the largest drug production base. In order to rescue all the hostages safely, they had to get close to him when he least expected it. If Kuang noticed the commotion, those ordinary tourists would lose their lives here. And that school at the border. This was the reason why Qin Mo didn't stand up even though he knew the movie was going to be an unfavorable test for him. He sat on the chair, looked at the screen, and held the teacup with his fingers. Because the knife wound on his face was still there, he looked a little fierce. His temperament as a big boss hadn't changed at all. Kuang held the remote control, pushing his spectacles before pressing the play button. It was not a movie. Instead, it was a video recorded by the school's surveillance system. Qin Mo leaned back. I don't seem to have the same taste as you. I'm not interested in artistic films with school themes. With that, he tilted his head. How's the inspection? Prince knew that it was time for him to regain his composure. It's all right, it's all good stuff. Brother, are we really going to stay here to watch a movie? It's so boring. If you're bored, go find something to do. Don't bother me and sir, Qin Mo said calmly. Kuang smiled. I'll bring second young Master Rong out to play. I want you to take a look at this movie. Boss Rong, don't misunderstand, this isn't an artistic film. You'll understand when you continue watching. It's something interesting that happened when I was playing outside. The moment he finished his sentence, a fat girl was suddenly pushed against the wall in the video. Even though there was no sound, everyone's expression could be seen in the video. They crossed their arms, as though they were interrogating. But it wasn't a friendly way of questioning. He raised his hand and poked the fat girl's shoulder. In that instant, the atmosphere in the room seemed to have changed. Was this school violence? Prince tried his best not to let anyone see his expression. But what exactly was going on with this video? Those people were obviously wearing their country's middle school uniform. Was this a local school? Which one? It wasn't that Prince hadn't gone to school before. When he was in school, he would occasionally see girls huddled together and neglected one of them. But it wasn't like this. This was already before Prince could think of anything. Chapter 1256. The fat girl in the video dashed out. He thought that was the end of the matter. Unexpectedly, the video was pulled to the classroom. On the screen, the teacher let a transfer student in. That transfer student was actually Little Black. Prince tried his best to control his expression, but in that instant, his hands still tightened around the handle of the chair. What was going on? Did Little Black go on a mission, and his disguise was exposed? Prince tightened his grip. He wanted to turn his head to look at his boss. At this moment, Kwang's attention was focused on Boss Rong's face. He didn't notice anyone else. Chin Mo crossed his legs, still in the same position, supporting his chin. He didn't seem interested in the video, only glancing at it occasionally. Even Bojio's appearance didn't pique his interest. But in that instant, no one could see the throbbing in his chest. Kwang raised his hand, raising his wine glass. Seems like Boss Rong is bored. It's all right. Chin Mo touched it casually. I'm more concerned about the business. Kwang smiled. Me too, but since the show has started, let's watch it till the end. Chin Mo didn't object, seemingly indifferent. But when he looked at the video again, he felt as if his heart was being squeezed. Why was she there and not at the military base? Chin Mo swirled his wine glass, as though that was the only way to suppress his uneasiness. Kwang spoke again, his tone filled with regret. All the students in this school were supposed to be my hostages, but this fellow ruined it. Boss Rong probably didn't know that this high school student isn't simple at all. It's a pity that her opponent is me. Chin Mo raised his hand, drinking a mouthful of wine, the ruthlessness of a gangster. That's interesting. Indeed. Kwang retracted his gaze, glancing in Fanjia's direction. The question in his eyes was obvious. Fanjia nodded. Kwang lowered his head with a smile, his eyes filled with danger. Up until now, there hadn't been any flaws. He had suspected that Chin Mo was the one in charge of the business. President Rong did look like someone from the underworld. Even his small habits didn't seem like something Chin Mo would do. In his memory, that young man was always arrogant, and when he looked at him, there was even a trace of boredom in his eyes. It was the most unpleasant experience he had ever had as a professor. All the students in the university looked at him with eyes full of worship. However, the successor that he had chosen was looking at him with that kind of gaze. In fact, it was completely incompatible with his philosophy. They were both people who understood human nature the most, just like him. Not only did they refuse to cooperate with him, but they even put him in jail. Heh. Ordinary people were meant to be used and dominated. It was time for Chin Mo to understand this logic. Yes, Kwang didn't really want Chin Mo to die. Rather than letting him die, he would rather have him become his subordinate. That was what he wanted to see the most. As long as he could successfully activate the hypnosis, Chin Mo would become his best weapon against the military. So he had to figure it out. After all, Boss Rong was here to do business. Chapter 1257. At this moment, outside the wooden hut, in the middle of the sea of flowers, it wasn't easy to grow the poppies well. The mercenaries would always patrol the area so that the farmers wouldn't dare to have any ulterior motives. Similarly, this area became the most heavily guarded area. Bojio carried her gun and walked past one of the farmers. Her actions were fierce. No one suspected her even when she was near the engine room. But in order to enter the engine room, she had to be able to match the slogan. Bojio walked back and forth. She looked like she was patrolling the perimeter, but in reality, she was listening to the movements there. 3 batches of people had entered the engine room. It was just that these 3 groups of people all had different slogans. Even with her strong memory, it was hard for her to enter such a defense mechanism. Just as Bojio narrowed her eyes, the 4th batch walked over. Bojio arched a brow. She held a cigarette in her right hand, and placed her left hand on the shoulder of one of them. "Brother, do you have a lighter?" "Of course." The person swept her a glance. But why do you look so unfamiliar? When did you come? Are you in charge of the engine room? Bojo watched his gaze and noticed the suspicion in it. She smiled faintly. I haven't been here for long. That's why I haven't seen you before. The person lit his lighter and moved it in front of her. Bojo lit the cigarette, but didn't continue to follow him. Instead, she waved her hand. Thanks. It's okay. The person's suspicions were dispelled when he saw that she wasn't moving forward. He walked towards the engine room. Bojo held the cigarette in her mouth. Her patrolling posture was natural, as though she had indeed been borrowing a lighter. However, only she knew that if she had continued, her identity would have been exposed. Breaking through the defense of the engine room was harder than she had imagined. It seemed like this time, she would have to be more patient and observe. Bojo glanced up and puffed out a string of smoke. She watched the setting sun and listened to the slogan of the 7th batch. A smile appeared on her lips. As expected, after the 3rd slogan, another round. She walked towards the engine room. As the 8th batch, she was stopped by the guards. They glanced at Bojo before replying, slogan. Bojo searched through her memories and recited the slogan unhurriedly. The guards looked at each other and stood to the side. Bojo knew her slogan was right. She held the gun in one hand and walked in. The computer room was huge. Once she entered, she could see the security cameras in the corridor. There were a total of 6 of them, and every single one of them was an obstacle to her movements. Therefore, she had to change her identity so that she could come into contact with the mainframe without using force. Yes, there was a change in her plan. After she saw so many cameras made, she wasn't going to destroy the tower again, because there was another way that was safer. Using the computers here to share IP addresses would not be blocked by the signal tower. The shielding equipment was like a protective shield that perfectly covered the area, making it impossible for anyone to find it quickly. But if it was their own network and equipment, it definitely wasn't blocked. Otherwise, how could they communicate normally? Bojo noticed that none of them had a phone. Even the mercenaries didn't have any. Not to mention the gardeners. The only thing that could silently share the address were the 5 computers in the computer room. Bojo glanced sideways at the technician who was making adjustments behind the glass. When one of them left, Bojo waited for him to leave. She followed after him. This scene wasn't wrong even under the surveillance cameras. After all, Bojo looked like she was patrolling. Bojo didn't take action immediately. Instead, she waited until the person entered the toilet. When he wasn't paying attention, she raised her hand and knocked him out. Then she dragged him into one of the compartments. Bojo scrutinized the person's state. She glanced over and reached out to tear his collar. His hair fell down and his back arched. She tugged at his shirt handsomely. With his messy hair, she put on his shirt. When she came out again, she had changed her clothes. She wasn't the same as before. She wore a pair of black-rimmed spectacles and dipped her hair in water, making it look a little oily. She wore a jacket, and when she walked, her posture changed. Her back was hunched, the perfect image of a technical otaku. Even a little dispirited. This meant that from the back, no one would know that she had changed into a different person. It was a perfect disguise. However, just as Bojo was about to leave, she noticed a little boy looking at her while washing his hands. The boy was about 11 or 12 years old. His skin was tan due to the intense daily life. Due to the poor environment, he looked very skinny. Especially his arms, he gave off a weak and small vibe. He didn't look dangerous standing there, because there was nothing in his eyes. It was pure black. The moment Bojo walked past him, the boy reached into his pocket in the mirror. It was an action of pulling out a gun. He had already pulled out his gun, the muzzle pointed at her back. Swoosh. The boy didn't seem to expect the other party to be on guard against him. Before he could open fire, his throat was pierced by the military knife that appeared. So much so that he couldn't even say a word. He just widened his eyes and leaned back. Bojo reached out and caught him. She locked the boy, whose body was gradually turning cold, together with the technician from before. At the start, Bojo didn't think about guarding against a child. Even if he were to calculate the time, it was very likely that he would have heard something. But as she approached the boy, A familiar image seemed to spill out of her mind. It was mentioned in the Bible. When your soul left your body, you would remember many things in your life. Those things would be like a movie replayed in your mind. But there were some memories that you would lose. For example, how you left your body, or things that you purposely wanted to blur out. That was why there was a saying, forget about your life so that you can rest in peace. But in that instant, there was a replay. Why did she die? It was because of that moment of softness. It was after she had settled a case, walking on the bustling streets of Tokyo. There was a cheerful Christmas atmosphere everywhere. An 11-year-old girl's balloon floated onto a tree. She tugged at her sleeve, asking if she could help her take the balloon down. At that time, Bojio didn't realize that the girl had taken out a gun when she turned around. It was very similar to the scene now. Kwang loved to nurture demons. Bojio wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Because of what she had learned from the Almighty, it was enough for her to observe the danger the child posed. Young children were the scariest when they hurt others. A child that could survive in such a place wasn't simple. Besides, Kwang was here. Bojio raised her hand, wiping the blood off her face. She knew that if it had been someone else, like Prince, he wouldn't have been so ruthless. But she was different. Her heart had long turned black. But sometimes, she would come back empty-handed. Bojio adjusted her jacket. When she walked out of the washroom, her back was hunched, befitting her current identity. There weren't any surveillance cameras in the washroom. Hence, the surveillance room didn't notice anything amiss. Even when Fanjia had taken a glance at the surveillance cameras, she hadn't been able to see through her disguise. But she wasn't Kwang, nor was she Chin Mo. When the images from different locations appeared, she could only tell that something was wrong, like this kind of disguise. Unless she had specially looked for it, it would be hard for anyone to notice anything amiss with just a glance. Besides, Bojio hadn't chosen anyone randomly. After careful observation, she had chosen someone with a figure that was the closest to her. Every technician was focused on their computer screen. Hence, when Bojio sat down, the other four hadn't snapped back to their senses. But Bojio couldn't be too obvious, because there were surveillance cameras here as well. At this moment, inside the wooden hut, the video showed a person struggling in the water. It seemed to be a prank in the school. Prince was still guessing. But the military doctor had already sensed something was amiss. This wasn't a scene from the surveillance cameras. Why had Kwang planted such a scene in the surveillance cameras? Wait a minute. Water. Every time their boss's mood fluctuated, it was related to water. Even they weren't sure what had happened that day. But the person who had planted the hypnosis knew. The military doctor, who was inspecting the other items, wanted to speak but Chin Mo interrupted him. How's the purity? It's very pure, the military doctor replied. Chin Mo chuckled, as though nothing had happened. He used his wine glass to touch Kwang's. Let's have a pleasant cooperation. Let's have a pleasant cooperation. Kwang's gaze dimmed. He seemed to be sizing up the person in front of him. At this moment, the video changed again. It was the scene where the youngster had gone to the infirmary to look for Kwang, who had disguised himself as the school doctor. The scene appeared clearly in front of everyone. In the video, Kwang was very knowledgeable. He had asked the youngster to test the thermometer politely. He seemed to have said something. The youngster didn't seem to be on guard. Then Kwang glanced at the thermometer that the youngster had tested. He stood up and walked towards the water heater. No one knew what medicine he had added. However, when he stood up, even the military advisor had a premonition that once the young man drank this thing, he would definitely be in danger. At that moment, Kwang had already sensed something was wrong with the youngster. Chapter 1258. The military doctor turned towards Chin Mo instinctively when he saw the scene in the video. Recruit number 10 held a special meaning to his boss. The military doctor remembered clearly how many rules his boss had broken in the military just to get closer to the recruit. He had never imagined that he would see such a smile on his boss's face. It was pure and without any impurities. It was because he had thought of that person. But now, the recruit wasn't able to escape. In the video, Kwang had already turned over. passing the medicine to the youngster. The youngster took it. At this moment, the video stopped. Prince's eyes were red, but he couldn't lift his head to show his abnormality. Kwang was in a good mood, pouring himself another glass of wine. Boss Rong, can you guess how I dealt with him in the end? Chinemo sat there, feeling a chill in his heart. After a certain degree of pain, he would no longer feel it. It was as though a part of his soul had been pulled out. He lifted the corner of his lips. Sir, I really can't guess your methods. After all, in my place you would just break your limbs. That would be too bloody for a weak doctor like me. I prefer a cleaner method. Kwang swirled his wine glass. Wasn't there a pond in the video? It's in the gymnasium near the school. I tied 2 bricks to his legs and threw him into the water. When he was in the water, he woke up but he couldn't come up after a long time. He sank to the bottom of the water. Chinemo listened to the voice beside his ear. The results told him not to believe Kwang's words. But his brain was indeed numb, his body sinking. He didn't dare to think too much because the moment he did, the scene that Kwang had described would appear in his mind. He had dreamed of it countless times but he didn't want to believe it. The blurry figure was sinking slowly in the water. No matter how he stretched out his hands, he couldn't pull her up. She was too far away, he didn't even have the chance to see her for the last time. Boss, the inspection is done. When the military doctor walked over, he accidentally knocked over the teacup on the table. Gotcha. He was shocked as if he had done something wrong. Boss, I deserve to die. Chinmo's hand turned cold. His fingertips moved, his gaze changing slightly. You broke Mr. Ka's teacup, not mine. Hearing this, the military doctor turned around and was about to apologize. Kwang raised his hand, a gentle smile on his face. It's just a cup. Boss Rong will come often in the future. This is just a small matter. When Scorpion heard his boss say this, he knew that there was no problem with this deal. The other party's identity had passed his boss inspection. It was indeed so. Kwang glanced at Boss Rong, who was still focused on the transaction. Basically, he denied some of his guesses. The hypnosis had been activated. But this person didn't react. Unless the person in the video wasn't important to him, or he wasn't Chinemo. Kwang was leaning towards the second option. After all, that youngster was their trump card against Chinemo. It was impossible for him not to be important. Although it was a little regretful that he didn't get to see what he wanted to see. However, the other aspects were not bad. For example, there was nothing wrong with this group of people. They could work together now. Kwang glanced up at Fanjia. Understanding, Fanjia walked to the front to check the money. Wang, they only brought half of the deposit. Oh, Kwang replied, turning towards the person beside him. Boss Rong, what do you mean? Sir, you are so guarded against others. I have to hold back. Chinemo glanced up. You asked us to come to the designated location, but you didn't even let us know the address. Sir, you should be aware that the scariest thing in the underworld is a scam. I'm afraid I might encounter such an incident at night. Moreover, Boss Rong's business has always been like this. The deposit will only be paid after the deal is settled. What he said made sense. Kwang knew that the longer one stayed in the underworld, the more cautious he was. After all, there would be times when he failed miserably. Chinemo stood up, grabbing his jacket. Since there are no problems with the goods, we can inform the consultant and get him to transfer the other portion of the deposit into your account. Prince spoke up at the right time. Brother, don't worry. I can't get through. I tried but there isn't any signal here. I'm sorry. Kwang smiled. Second young master must not be used to it. I have no choice. This place is only this big and it's just a business to maintain my livelihood. However, China keeps chasing after me. In order to defend myself, I have to resort to such means. With that, Kwang paused. Fanjia, pass your phone to Boss Rong. Yes. Fanjia reached out, passing her phone over. Since he wasn't the person, there wasn't much to see. Chinemo didn't move. Prince didn't know what was wrong with his boss, but he knew he had to pick up the phone. They had put in so much effort just for this. He reached out to take the phone, placing it in Chinmo's palm. Brother, you should contact the family. The consultant won't listen to me. Qin Mo's gaze was deep. Prince couldn't read his emotions, but there was an indescribable danger in his eyes. Contact the family, Qin Mo replied, dialing a string of numbers. Ring ring ring. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be any phones in such an important meeting. But the phone that rang was the one everyone hoped would light up. According to the original plan, Qin Mo would use this number to contact the higher-ups. An unknown number was displayed on the screen. General Qin was in his military uniform. He lifted his finger and pressed the answer button. Hello, is this the consultant? He turned on the hands-free button. Everyone in the conference room was quiet. They were giving General Qin time to communicate with them. At the same time, someone hurriedly made a hand gesture, indicating for them to locate the source of the call. General Qin replied in a low voice, "It's me." His voice seemed to wake Qin Mo up. "There's no problem with the goods, you can transfer the money." "What's the account number?" Everyone knew that these weren't the most important questions. The most important thing was to confirm the exact location of the operation team, through the duration of the call. After all, it usually took a long time to read out the account number. This was Qin Mo's plan from the start. It was to prevent the other party from cutting off all their communication devices, preventing them from tracking their location. Now they finally saw a glimmer of hope. But no one expected that the glimmer of hope would disappear as quickly as it came. Just as Qin Mo read out the two numbers, the signal came from the other side. It was the sound of the phone being hung up. Beep, beep, beep. Damn it. The technical soldier outside the meeting room threw his earpiece away, his hands clenched into fists. Just a little more, and we would have been able to locate the exact location of the call. The leader in the meeting room glanced over. Everyone was concerned about the outcome. How is it? The technical soldier shook his head. The person at the top said, "Continue to lock on." The technical soldier wanted to continue locking onto the target, but he knew very well that it was impossible to lock onto the target without the signal. The other party didn't just hang up, he removed the communication card. Indeed. Kuang reached for the phone when Qin Mo said the second number, smiling. "Let Fan Jia send the account number." With that, he tossed the phone behind him. Fan Jia caught the phone, and removed the communication card in it. Hunter and Magician clenched their fists when they saw this. They weren't sure if the time was enough for the troops to locate their exact location. However, this wasn't the only problem Dr. Qin was worried about. The most important thing was Boss. Perhaps Boss didn't realize it himself, but the light in his eyes had started to change. Boss? What was he thinking? Qin Mo wasn't thinking about anything. Images flashed through his mind. Every scene was related to the youngster. In the end, there was the surging water and the wrist he couldn't grab in time. At this moment, the technical soldier outside the meeting room was still trying his best. Just as he was about to tell General Qin that he couldn't locate young master's location, suddenly, a red dot lit up on his local network. It was here. This was the address that young master had just called from. Wait a minute. This was signal transmission? Someone had hacked into the other party's network? How was that possible? Even though he couldn't believe it, it was indeed the address. The technical soldier didn't hesitate. With the red dot's guidance, it was too easy to locate them. In less than a minute, the technical soldier shouted, "General, it's done. The coordinates are 35 degrees north latitude, 47 degrees south latitude." The technical soldier didn't know that he wasn't the only one with a red dot. Everyone who was tracking Qin Mo and young Master Tang had the same result. Fatty and young Master Tang had the same result. In just a short moment, the sea, land and air forces rushed towards the same direction at the fastest speed. In the computer room on the island, Bojio was still sitting in her seat, a pair of spectacles on her face. On the computer screen, she seemed to be adjusting the local surveillance system. But in reality, under the hidden dialog box, there was a continuous stream of code. She didn't hack into the network. Instead, she opened up the computer room's IP to maximize the sharing. The computer room's IP was shared, but it could only be shared locally. Now, she had opened up the network and cracked the password. Then, he would create a fake protective cover to stabilize the balance of the regional network. This way, he would be able to transmit the address without anyone noticing. The signal jamming tower was still there. Phones from the outside world couldn't be used here. But there was one thing. They thought it was the safest. In reality, they didn't know that their location had been leaked. Kwang didn't come to the computer room today because he had a business meeting. But very quickly he sent Fan Jiao over. At this moment, Bojio was already repairing the system and erasing the traces, restoring the IP to its original state. Then she stood up, pushed the glasses on her face, and walked towards the bathroom. When she came out again, she was dressed as a mercenary, holding a rifle in one hand. Bojio hadn't expected to meet Fan Jia face to face. Fortunately, her face was black and she had grown a layer of beard. Bojio didn't dodge. Instead, she walked towards Fan Jia as though she was patrolling. Both of them brushed past each other. Suddenly, Fan Jia glanced in Bojio's direction, narrowing her eyes. Wait a minute. Bojio paused, turning back slowly. She was wondering if her injection was faster, or the big guy beside Fan Jia's rifle. Time seemed to have slowed down, stretched out. Fan Jia glanced at Bojio's face, asking, "Did you see anyone suspicious?" No. Bojio released the injection in her pocket. This way, she looked more natural, the tattoo at the corner of her eyes more obvious. Fan Jia had more important things to do. She wasn't going to waste her time on a mercenary. She turned, reaching out to push the glass door open. Bojio stood outside, her voice faintly audible. Is there anything amiss? No. Where's the person sitting on the second computer? She's here. She probably went to the washroom. Fan Jia frowned, turning on the computer on the second computer instinctively. Her first reaction was to check if there were any signs of an attack on the regional network, to check if there were any problems with the firewall. She also checked the computer for any abnormalities. After confirming there were no problems, she stood up, her expression unhappy. In the future, no one is allowed to go out alone, not even to the washroom, understand? Yes. After Fan Jia heard the answer she wanted, she tested the shielding equipment. It was working normally. At this moment, Fan Jia didn't know. What exactly had she missed out? If Kwang had been here, he might have been able to sort out the problem quickly. No matter how smart Fan Jia was, she wouldn't have guessed that the computer room seemed normal, but in reality, it had been attacked. And the person who had attacked it. Bojio walked out of the computer room. She reached out, pulling the mask up to her nose. It was probably because the mercenary's gait exuded a sense of wildness. He held the gun with one hand, his gaze filled with murderous intent. Hence, she didn't suspect his identity. Bojio walked forward, one hand in her pocket, passing through the flower railings. Her next target was the wooden hut by the river. Bojio tilted her handsome face. Behind the veil, she couldn't help but smile. Brother Emo, I'll see you soon. Chapter 1259. But at that moment, Bojio wasn't aware of what Chin Emo was going through. The fastest reinforcements would need at least 10 minutes to get here. 10 minutes. Chin Emo suppressed the images countless times, but the emptiness in his chest was unbearable. No one noticed that his eyes had darkened. Even Kwang's attention was on Fan Jia. How is it? Master, don't worry, the engine room is functioning normally. That's good. Kwang smiled, continuing to lead them towards the lake. The poppies there were in full bloom, and the latest product was produced. It was a type of candy that was even more addictive than ecstasy. Or rather, it was disguised as a candy. Prince's eyelids twitched when he saw this. Kwang seemed to enjoy his shock, tearing one of the candies apart. This is the perfect disguise. It will be easier to enter the country. The stationery is still a risk, but these fake candies are different. Besides, in the Chinese market, these are the most popular candies in the nightclubs. However, the checks are too strict and it isn't easy for some people to sell them. It would be best if the Rong family has the channels. At this moment, Prince felt extremely fortunate that they had contacted Kwang before the drug dealers. He was really vicious. In his mind, there wasn't anything he should or shouldn't do. What would happen if these things entered the supermarket by mistake? Children would definitely eat them. Prince couldn't imagine such a scene. Was Kwang trying to use drugs to control everyone's lives? Why? Second young master doesn't seem to like such packaging. Kwang was observant, his eyes dark as he watched Prince's expression. In that instant, almost everyone sensed a message. There was a flaw on their side. Kwang was suspicious. At the same time, Fanjia, who had hung up, glanced at the number 2 camera. After waiting for a full 3 minutes, she suddenly asked, "When did he go to the toilet?" "It's been about 15 minutes. The technician beside her frowned. "What happened? Why did he take so long?" Fanjia wasn't stupid. Her instincts told her that something must have happened. He turned around and strode in the direction of the bathroom. The mercenaries were the first to enter. When they reached the last cubicle, they turned their heads and said, "There's someone inside." Fanjia narrowed her eyes. "Kick it open." Yes. The mercenaries were still very destructive. With one kick, the wooden door was kicked open with a bang. There were indeed people inside. However, it was completely different from what they had imagined. A technician who had been knocked unconscious, and a boy who had been stabbed in the head with a syringe. It was easy to imagine what this signified. Fanjia didn't hesitate. Her first reaction was to call Kwang. "Hey." Kwang's gaze was still on Prince's face, but it was hard to tell. Fanjia's voice was anxious. "Master, the engine room has been tampered with. There's something wrong with the business owner's identity." Kwang clenched his fists when he heard this. At that moment, no one could tell. He turned his smile even gentler. Dressed in a white coat, he exuded a murderous aura. "I already know, it's not a big problem. I'll come over after the arrangements are made. I still have to discuss the new product with Boss Rong." Fanjia had been by Kwang's side for a long time. The moment she heard his words, she understood what he meant. The other party was still around. Her master knew about it, but he pretended to be oblivious. He wanted to lead them to a dead end and destroy them all. These people weren't afraid of death. They came in waves. They were smarter than before. So what? All of them would die here. Fanjia hated the fact that she hadn't caught the youngster in the video. If she had, she would have fed her drugs and turned her into a living hell. It was better than letting her disappear. On the other side, Kwang had already hung up. He glanced up at the group. Everyone must be hungry after watching for so long. "Why don't we eat while looking at the new product, Scorpion?" "Yes." Scorpion didn't know what had happened. Kwang smiled. "Bring out the feast we usually prepare for our VIPs. Let Boss Rong and the rest have a good taste." Scorpion paused, instantly understanding the meaning behind those words. His eyes turned dangerous as he glanced at Prince and the others, lowering his head and replying, "Yes." When he turned around again, his expression had changed. He made a throat-slitting gesture at the mercenaries who were looking at him. Kwang continued to lead them forward. Just as Prince and the rest were about to take a step forward, suddenly, their boss lowered the hand holding the cigarette, tapping the side of his thigh lightly. Once, twice, thrice. It was fast and rhythmic. It was a common code used during World War II. There were only 5 words in the translation. Kwang is going to attack. Be it hunter or wolf, both of them instinctively looked for their weapons in that instant. Kwang continued, "I admire Boss Rong's courage, but it's a pity, a pity." With that he turned, raising his hand to shoot. Unexpectedly, the person who was originally standing next to him was 1 step faster than him. His figure flashed, and his leg kicked the gun in his hand away. Kwang's eyes darkened. The mercenaries opened fire in unison. However, these people seemed to be prepared in advance. They slid into the flower field and used the harvester to block their bodies. Prince leaned against the wheel, not having the chance to catch his breath. Boss's voice rang out. "Jacket." Prince snapped back to his senses, removing his jacket and tossing it over. Chin Mo and Wolf stood at the same position, pulling the pendants down. The 2 of them started working. In less than 20 seconds, 2 small guns were produced. Prince was wearing bullets on his wrist. There weren't many, only 10 bullets. They were loaded into the 2 guns. When they had entered, they had gone through a strict inspection. Scorpion was so thorough that he even checked their ears. He hadn't expected them to have guns. Charge, they don't have any weapons. Scorpion lifted the gun in his hand. But the moment he finished speaking, there was a loud bang. The mercenary closest to the harvester fell to the ground, his head blown off. They have a sniper. The mercenaries exchanged glances, wanting to scatter. But a second gunshot rang in the air. Another bullet pierced through his chest. Scorpion couldn't figure out where they had gotten their weapons from, until he saw the black leather jacket. He kicked the wooden bucket beside him. It was filled with poppies. How dare they trick him so brazenly? That second young master didn't like this kind of upstart clothing that was full of metal accessories. Instead, he liked to assemble those accessories together to form a gun. Scorpion hadn't thought of this. Firstly, Prince's image was too deep. Secondly, it was hard to guess Almighty Qin's tricks. That was why Scorpion had made a mistake in his work. He was able to react better. Everything that the other party had done was planned, even disguising as someone was one of them. Very quickly, Scorpion realized that they weren't the same as the people they had met previously. Ah! Scorpion screamed, aiming his gun at the same spot. Who exactly are you? Qin Mo's gaze darkened. After the bullet brushed past his ear, he seemed to have woken up again. He lifted his head and said, Chinese soldiers. The words were like blood that flowed into his heart. This made Prince stand up abruptly. He caught the gun that Wolf threw over, and fired at the mercenary on the right who was trying to approach him. 3 people had already fallen on this side, but the people on the other side were completely unharmed. Kuang watched the scene with a dark expression. Set up the sniper cannon. Yes. Scorpion's eyes flashed. He pushed the person beside him away, and placed the long-barrel sniper cannon on his shoulder. A shot like that, as long as it hit the harvester, it wouldn't just be the machine that would explode, the people behind would be blown away as well. But right at this moment, suddenly, a loud buzzing sound came from the sky. In that instant, everyone on the ground looked up at the sky. 1, 2, 3, 4. A total of 18 military fighter jets with the red flag on them rushed out of the spreading clouds, appearing in front of them with an unstoppable aura. This time, there was no warning. With the evidence that Qin Mo and his team had gathered, it was enough for them to send their troops across the border. But there was one point. China had to bring Kuang back to decide whether he was dead or alive. If he landed in someone else's hands, no one could be sure if this time would be the same as the previous time. Someone would make use of a deal with the upper class to bring Kuang back. Judging from the events that had happened before, there was a problem with the MT government. That was why Kuang had been so arrogant for so long. The moment he pointed at the military council, it was like a flood. But there wasn't a hint of panic on Kuang's face. They don't dare to move. There are so many bombs buried here. If they throw a bomb, we won't be the only ones dying. Indeed, the military planes couldn't strafe. Scorpion lifted his lips, raising the sniper cannon, and firing at the wings in the sky. Bang! One of the military planes suffered damage, losing its balance. Chapter 1260. Kuang's words caused strategist's heart to skip a beat. He turned back abruptly. Due to his boss's posture, he couldn't see his expression at all. But he felt an inexplicable sense of unease. He couldn't describe the uneasiness he felt. Just his posture was enough to send a chill down strategist's spine. Qin Mo stood there with a gun in his hand, as though the changes around him didn't affect him at all. But strategist knew something wasn't right. Boss shouldn't be like this. Kuang must have sensed the problem before him. That was indeed the case. The more he looked at Qin Mo, the wider the smile on Kuang's face. It wasn't easy for us to meet, and we have to separate immediately. Actually, I really want to sit down and have a good talk with you about the topic I was talking about. I believe that after today, you will have a different opinion. Kuang glanced at the watch on his wrist. It's about time. Scorpion will stay behind to play with you guys. See you later. With that, he gestured to the mercenaries. Immediately, someone started the speedboat parked on the lake. Everyone on the mission knew they couldn't let Kuang leave this place. Once he entered Country Tea and was caught, he would be out of China's interrogation range. But the firepower on the ground was too strong, and the military planes couldn't open fire due to the bombs buried in the ground. Once they got close, their wings would be shot off. Almost everyone tightened their grip on this point. Qin Emo still stood there, his eyes reflecting Kuang's back view. The white coat of the doctor overlapped with the image in his memory, causing his gaze to darken. Wolf watched as his boss strolled out. He turned, immediately thinking of a way to cover himself. Qin Emo moved quickly, his entire body exuding a cold aura. Just as the mercenary raised his hand to kill him, a card shot out faster than a bullet. A card that was faster than a bullet burst out in an instant and stabbed straight into his forehead. The card was Qin Emo, but the way he killed him was like magic. Before anyone realized it, their skin had already been scratched by the cards. At this moment, Kuang was preparing to board the boat. He turned back and glanced at the figure following them. He seemed to be in a hurry, but surprisingly, he didn't ask anyone to stop Qin Emo. Instead, it seemed like she was purposely making him follow her. She heard someone calling Boss Qin. Kuang narrowed his eyes. Let Scorpion destroy the harvester first, it's annoying for the people behind. Come on, Qin Emo, wait a little longer. You will be my most successful masterpiece. He believed that at that time. You will be willing to call me teacher. Kuang smiled as he stepped onto the boat. The mercenary stood on the shore. His figure was very familiar. He took the earpiece and said, King wants you to get rid of the special forces on the land first. Scorpion smiled and adjusted the aim of the sniper rifle. I'll take care of it now. On the other side, Prince glanced sideways and sensed the other party's intention. He wanted to push Wolf, who was the closest to him, away. The corner of Scorpion's mouth curled deeper and deeper, his killing intent filling the sky. All of you die. Just as his finger was about to pull the trigger, a voice rang out. Bang! A fierce gunshot rang out from an unknown place. Chapter 1261. D***, there's a sniper. In an instant, all the mercenaries were in chaos. Blood splattered everywhere. Scorpion didn't even know how he died. He was already lying on the ground with his cannon. But that wasn't the end. At the highest point of the flower field, a slender figure was lying on the ground, with a rifle resting on her shoulder. The hair on her forehead fell down, revealing only a pair of eyes. Her breathing was slow, but the speed at which she fired the gun was shockingly fast. She locked onto him accurately. It was a clean shot. Bang! Another gunshot rang out. Before the mercenaries could even react, Xian had already taken out his cannon. The military aircraft in midair had already found an opportunity to descend. Prince, who had been prepared to die, widened his eyes. He glanced at his back before glancing up in disbelief. Someone is helping us? Could it be someone from the same industry that Kuang didn't eliminate? That's not possible. Strategist had received the information. According to what he knew, all the spies here had been locked up by Kuang. But how could he explain the two gunshots? Fatty, who had landed with the military aircraft, had had this question when he had received the red dot signal. After hearing the two gunshots, he was even more certain of his suspicions. There was someone else here besides his boss. But who could that person be? Forgive Fatty for his low intellect, he couldn't figure it out. But it was undeniable that the situation had changed because of the sniper's hidden shot. If the first military aircraft could descend, the second one would be able to as well. The mercenaries had started to change their tactics from their frenzied shooting. This was because they knew very well that once these military aircraft were given a chance to land, these Huaxiao soldiers would give them a thorough and painful blow. The two gunshots were the ones that had caused this opening. The sky was filled with military green, occupying every spot. Prince managed to snatch a gun that belonged to him. His figure was like a dragon as he weaved through the crowd. His combat skills were finally on full display. When he lifted his lids, he glanced towards the flower field. The figure was gone. Where did it go? Prince was still curious about who had saved them. On the other side, Kuang sensed the change in the situation. His eyes dimmed and his fingers tightened. He wasn't as calm as before. Instead, he was furious. Set sail. Yes. The person in charge of the rudder started the ship. 3 mercenaries stood at the bow and were pushing. Looking at the speedboat cutting through the water, Kuang slowly released his grip. But before the corners of his mouth curled up, 2 poker cards took the lives of 2 of his men. It was Qin Mo. At this time, he had already wiped off the disguise on his face. Dressed in a black windbreaker, he looked like a demon from hell. Coupled with the flames behind him and the poker cards revolving around his palm, he gave off a dangerous aura that could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth. The big mercenary obviously took a step back. The speedboat sped up. Qin Mo stepped on the corpses by the river and leaped onto the front of the boat. Kuang stood at the cabin. When he looked at the hair hanging down his forehead, he smiled deeply. Is it painful? Qin Mo, you are my student. In terms of psychological research, I won't lose to you. So stop struggling. Look at this lake. Isn't it similar to the one you saw previously? Speaking of which, you can't protect the person you like because of your responsibilities. Do you still remember our lesson? Humans are selfish. If you aren't selfish, you won't be able to protect the person you want to protect. In this world, there will always be people who don't follow the bottom line. Do you want to know how I discovered the identity of your little lover? She was probably influenced by you. She actually wanted to save one of my believers. It's a pity that believer of mine doesn't care about anything as long as she can be noticed. It wasn't easy to choose her. Don't you people in China pay attention to small things? When I found out that she stood on the side of the plagiarist and didn't care about who was the original author, she even posted a long post to prove how smart she was. I locked onto her as my believer. As expected, as long as you give her a chance to stand in front of everyone, she will do anything, including betraying the person who thought she was bullied and wanted to protect her. That person is you, the one who tried so hard to sneak into the school to deal with me. It's a pity. From a certain perspective, I admire her. For example, the way she struggled to survive in the pond. This was a further hint. If Qin Mo was clear-headed, he would definitely know and eliminate it immediately. But now, Qin Mo wasn't clear-headed. In fact, the moment he saw the youngster in the video take the cup of water, his mental defenses were already starting to crumble. But at that moment, there was a belief that supported him. That belief was to complete the mission. Kuang would probably never understand. To a soldier in China, especially to someone like Qin Mo, what did belief mean? It meant that even if the hypnosis was activated, he wouldn't give up. Kuang could see the change in Qin Mo's emotions. The hand hanging by his side clenched tighter. The happier Kuang was. Now the boat was a distance away from the riverbank. He believed that no one would be able to catch up to them. Similarly, he believed Qin Mo wouldn't attack him again. As long as he continued to guide this person who had completely lost his mind, then he would be able to use his sharpness. Kuang had waited for this day for a long time. He couldn't control his excitement at the thought of being able to use Qin Mo. It was obvious from Kuang's state. He tried hard to control his emotions, wanting to slow down his tone so that he could carry out the hypnosis better. Think about it. Are those people worth saving? Other than making you lose the most important person in your life, what else did they bring you? Qin Mo, you can totally change your way of living. You are the chosen one. Why did you have to choose such a difficult path? As long as you let go of the unnecessary perseverance in your heart, the person you love won't leave you. I know you want revenge now. Those people who made you lose her, every single one of them is trash. What's wrong with getting rid of these trash? You should kill all of them, isn't that right? Chapter 1262. Her deep voice was like the water in the lake, drowning all of Qin Mo's senses. The speed of her speech, the tone of her voice and the content she was feeding him. Kuang was using a targeted hypnosis. He watched as the tall and straight figure stood in front of him. He paused, reaching out to press down on his head. On the other side, after firing the 2 shots, Boju leaped up from the flower field. She realized that Qin Mo had boarded the speedboat. The only way she could catch up to him was to hide her Lamborghini 600 meters away. But it wasn't possible for her to not be discovered. even when she flew past him. When Prince saw the familiar figure, he couldn't help pausing. Little Black. It's really Little Black. The next second, he saw her clothes and the rifle in her hands. He recalled her previous position. His eyes widened. It's Little Black. The one who helped us just now was Little Black. Doctor saw Bojio's face. The youngster's face had probably been rubbed against the bushes, her disguise gone. Her cold face looked especially pleasantly surprised at this moment. They hadn't expected it. Bojio was the one who had been helping them. Fatty was the most shocked among them. He opened his mouth and shouted, "Big Spade." That explained why he had received the red dot's location. It was because of her. She was actually here. Fatty couldn't tell what he was feeling because he couldn't find a second person who would enter the tiger's den alone to save the boss and turn the situation around with his own strength. This reminded him of the days in Supreme Alliance. He had seen her shoulder the heavy burden and lead Supreme Alliance out of the encirclement. But, however, such a person might not be able to return to the esports arena. But even so, she had still appeared here. She could have stayed out of trouble. Both her and their boss. But they had still come to the most dangerous place. Because they had to save these people. Fatty wasn't afraid of anything. He was most afraid of not being able to make it in time. Doctor was the same. Hence, when he saw the youngster's face, his first reaction was to shout towards the lake. "Boss, the most important person to you is still alive." It was useless. The speedboat was already quite far away. Now they could only vaguely see that they had stopped there. As for what exactly happened, no one knew. Swoosh. Bojio lifted the banana leaf that was blocking the Lamborghini. Voice recognition unlock. The car door opened with a snap. The navigation system began operating. Originally, Little Black wanted to tease its master humorously. "I'm done changing the diving mode. I'll be right back." Entering diving mode. The navigation system fluctuated. "The fuel is not full. Master, please be careful. We might not be able to return." Bojio reached out to block the water goggles. "Ignore it." "Yes." When Little Black heard this, he knew that his master had lost his usual composure. Otherwise, he wouldn't have set off so recklessly without considering the amount of fuel. Not only that, there was also the look on her face when she held the steering wheel and dived into the water. It wasn't like her at all. But it made one's heart ache. Little Black heard her voice. There was a rare sense of urgency. She said, "Brother Mo, wait a little longer. I'll be there soon." Little Black did not understand human emotions. It just knew how to look. If there was a person, he would really like that person too much. His greatest fear would be losing them. On the lake, in the cabin, Kwang took another step forward, his gaze landing on Chin Mo's lifeless eyes. "I have a remote control here. As long as you press the red button, you will be able to eliminate a portion of the people who caused her death. As for the rest, you can take your time to find them." At this moment, Chin Mo seemed to be bewitched, his lifeless eyes looking towards the brightest color. "Come, you are the most qualified person to judge." Kwang was still as refined as ever. After all, the main event was about to begin. As long as he pressed the button, the wooden house not far from the speedboat would be blown away. There were countless bombs buried underneath. The Chinese soldiers who had destroyed his plans, and the people who refused to be captured would be buried along with his flower field. Most importantly, the person who would do it was Chin Mo. Just based on this point, he had already won. Yes, from the start, this was Kwang's plan. He didn't care much about his subordinates. Although it would definitely be a little difficult to find some people who were convenient to use. But Chin Mo was enough to exchange for them. With that thought, Kwang's smile deepened. Chin Mo reached out his hand as though he was being commanded. Just as Kwang thought he was going to press the button, there was a swoosh sound. The remote control was thrown into the water. Chin Mo was still standing at his position. The wind from the river blew against his black trench coat, making him look like a vampire about to explode. There was an indescribable evil smile on his lips, as though he was mocking the world with a hint of bloodlust. Kwang's expression changed instantly, because after looking at Chin Mo, he suddenly remembered an article on psychology. Most people would have a natural sense of submission to their psychological mentor when they triggered a psychological cue. But there was a 0.1% of people who, when their beliefs reached a certain level, wouldn't submit to their psychologist. Instead, they would become more and more. Kwang didn't want to continue thinking. He raised his hand, wanting to shoot Chin Mo. Since he couldn't tame someone, he should be killed right here and now. Chin Mo wouldn't give him the chance. In a flash, the poker card in his hand flew out again. This time, it was even more murderous than before. When the poker card brushed past his wrist, Kwang missed his aim in pain. The bullet flew past his side, hitting the mercenary who wanted to stop Chin Mo. Kwang's eyes widened. He knew how powerful Chin Mo was, but he didn't know where his bottom line was. But this time he saw it. At the same time, he also saw the true hell. At this moment, Chin Mo didn't have any reservations. Because he didn't have any reservations, there was only one thought left in his mind. Kill. Kill. Kill them all. Especially this person. Many people had said that young Master Chin's hands looked good when he played games, and would definitely be more beautiful when he played the piano. But they didn't know that Chin Mo's hands were porcelain white and cold. When he picked up the poker card to kill someone, it could be described as breathtaking. As the prey, Kwang's heart had never raced so fast. In that moment, his eyes were filled with panic. Even the usual gentleness on his face was gone. He pressed down on his hand, wanting to pick up the gun anxiously. Chin Mo walked in front of him. His eyes were as deep as they had been when they first met. But this time, the flickering light was a little dark. You're right, they all deserve to die. But the one who deserves to die the most is you, Professor. Chin Mo smiled nonchalantly. When he smiled, there were still traces of blood under his eyes. He was incomparably handsome. You seem to have always wanted to control me. Professor, didn't the documents you studied tell you that when things reach an extreme, they will go in the opposite direction? With that, the poker card in Chin Mo's hand was already pressed against Kwang's neck. I do have some regrets, Kwang said. As Kwang spoke, a blade appeared in his palm. Without waiting for Chin Mo to defend himself, he stabbed the blade towards him. Chin Mo dodged, his long leg kicking him to the side, sending him crashing into the cabin. Kwang's eyes wavered. He had realized his end. If it had been the Chin Mo of the past, he wouldn't have been in this state. But Kwang laughed lowly, black veins seeping out of his eyes. Chin Mo, you have already become another me. Do you think you can leave this battle unscathed? Even if I die, you will lose. You are still the same as when you were a professor. You talk too much. Chin Mo laughed as he lifted him up. His eyes were starting to overflow with red. Since you like water so much, we will do it your way. Tie a heavy object and sink. Don't worry, I won't knock you out. Things like drowning should be slowly enjoyed. Panic was evident on Kwang's face. He would rather Chin Mo raise his hand and shoot him. He had never expected Chin Mo to use such a method. He was awake, but couldn't save himself. Was he going to let him have a taste of all the suffering that person had gone through? Kwang wanted to resist. But once he lost the psychological battle, he would no longer have any advantage over Chin Mo. In less than 2 seconds, Kwang realized that something had cut his wrist. Anyone with a little experience would know what it would be like to be thrown into the water after cutting one's wrist. The more he struggled, the faster the blood would flow. Moreover, there was a heavy object tied to Kwang's legs. There was a muffled sound of falling into the water. He didn't even have the chance to surface, unless he bent his body and removed the heavy object from his legs. But just like what had been said, the more he moved his hands in the water, the faster the blood would flow. Moreover, the loss of blood left him with no energy to untie the knot. Actually, all high-level psychologists had learned how to untie knots. This time, Kwang couldn't make it. At the start, he was still struggling. When he couldn't breathe, blood started to spread on the surface of the lake. Gradually, his fingers stopped moving, and his whole body sank deeper and deeper. The speedboat had stopped. Chin Mo stood in the cabin, his head throbbing. He took the opportunity to sit down. Blood slowly dyed his eyes. Have you heard of a story? The story went like this. In the Bible, the archangel in charge of the divine world, Michael. He was as noble as snow and had the most beautiful appearance. He was the light of the entire divine world. But no one knew that the archangel had lost all emotions when he was maintaining order in the human world. He sacrificed his flesh and blood to save people time and time again. But when he was attacked by others, he understood that humans were just like that. Because he had seen all the darkness. Regardless of the situation, even if he passed by the shore, his holy battle robe wouldn't be tainted when he was guiding others. Until he met someone. The most rebellious fallen angel, the young Lucifer. Michael's emotions returned. At first he was impatient. Then he wanted to see that person. After all, from the start, that person had provoked him. At that time, Lucifer's devil consciousness hadn't been activated. When he lay in his arms, he was like an obedient little devil. Michael thought that the two of them would be together for a long time. Until the divine world received a letter from the human world and launched the largest war. His most beloved Lucifer walked out of the raging fire and was burned beyond recognition. From then on, when Michael waved the sword in his hand, there was only coldness. He was in a high position. He killed people like flies. And now Chinemo was like Michael. Under the dim yellow light. He was half lying in the cabin, as if he didn't care how much blood was on his hands. The setting sun dyed his eyes red. Elegant, mysterious, noble, these words still suited him. But anyone who saw him at this time would know. This wasn't the Chinemo they knew. Chinemo tilted his eyes as if he was admiring the approaching night. In this state, he was even more hesitant to move forward like the speedboat with the red flag. At this moment, there were rolling waves. Black bats flew up from the bottom of the lake. A figure jumped onto the speedboat that was stained with blood. People watched from afar. The youngster took off the water shield in front of his forehead. His hair seemed to be dripping water. Major General Chin, who was sitting on the ground, reached out and grabbed his neck. In an instant, almost everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Young Master Tang, who was standing at the front, realized a problem. Chinmo's hypnosis is complete. The highest order was that once Chinemo got into an uncontrollable state, they had to bring him back and let the higher-ups make a decision. How exactly should they handle the situation? But now they didn't dare to go near him. He was too dangerous. Chinemo watched the youngster in front of him and smiled slowly. That smile was evil and bloodthirsty. A prey that came to your doorstep? Bojo couldn't breathe. Her gaze landed on the pair of completely unfamiliar eyes. Her heart felt as though it was being cut by a knife, but she was smiling. She found it hard to speak. Brother Emo, it's fine that you forgot about me when I was young. But how can you forget about me now that I've grown up? Brother Emo? Chinemo inched closer to the youngster's face. How can I have such a short brother that can't even lie? In reality, Chinemo couldn't understand why he released his grip instinctively when he felt a little uncomfortable. It was as though he was possessed. Forget it. The youngster couldn't do anything to him. Anyway, if he dared to move, he could use the poker card to slit his throat. But Chinemo didn't expect that. The moment he released him, the youngster hugged himself. His voice was slightly hoarse. Brother Emo, this time, it's my turn to bring you home. Chapter 1263. Go home? Chinemo glanced at the person hugging him, reaching out to lift the youngster's chin. This person was really interesting. Didn't he see the blood on his hands? Still, he didn't see the person who was no longer breathing. There was so much blood. It was obvious he was the killer. The speedboat on the lake. No one dared to approach him. But this youngster came over as though he wasn't afraid of death. What exactly was he trying to do? Chinemo scanned her face before speaking slowly. The people behind you don't seem to have any intention of bringing me home. At this moment, Bojo remained neutral. I'm not on the same side as them, I'm in the underworld. Chinmo's side profile didn't reveal any emotions. Especially now, he was smiling, the cards in his hands never leaving. It was obvious he didn't believe her. You called me brother just now, are you my younger brother? No. He thought the youngster would admit it. After all, it would lower his mental defenses. Chinemo didn't expect to hear a negative answer. His brows were about to arch. The young man leaned forward, and those light-colored lips touched his lips. Chin Mo stilled. He could feel the breath on the youngster's body and the slightly chilly softness. There was a tinge of candy spreading from his lips. It was so warm that he didn't push the youngster away immediately. Then, he heard the youngster's voice again. "I'm your sugar daddy. We're a couple." Chin Mo paused for a moment. Her gaze landed on the young man's slightly upturned lips, and she reached out to press his head down. She tilted her body slightly, and her breath blew into the young man's ear. "You mean not only did I fall in love with a boy, but I'm also being kept by this boy?" Brother Mo Bojo smiled, not denying his words. Instead, she held onto his hand and moved it towards her chest. The softness on his palm made Chin Mo's fingers pause, his brows furrowing slightly. A girl? She was so thick-skinned? But the youngster was like a little gangster, completely unaware of her thick skin. She inched closer to the tip of his nose. "Your favorite feeling." Interesting. The more Chin Mo looked at him, the more interesting he found him. He lifted his eyebrows slowly. "Indeed, I don't like those that are too big. Other than being small, you don't have any other good points." Bojo. Why didn't the Almighty forget his venomous tongue, even after turning dark? However, when it comes to inspecting goods, I still need to do this to know if it's to my liking. Chin Mo reached out and pulled Bojo into his arms. Under the cover of the black trench coat, his hand had already reached under her clothes. It was hard not to like her waistline. It was smooth, porcelain white, and delicate, just like a piece of top-grade jade. The moment they touched, Chin Mo fell in love with the feeling. His eyes darkened as if he hated the influence this person had on him. Without changing his expression, he reached out and pushed the young man to a safe place. "What is it?" Bojo blushed. Her ears were burning from the kiss. When Chin Mo saw this, he smiled, his eyes filled with danger. "Since you are my sugar daddy, shouldn't you be the one to distract the speedboats on the lake?" Bojo sensed his resistance towards the military uniform. And in those deep eyes, there was a vicious aura that constantly floated out. It was a completely different emotion. But even so, he was still him. "What is it?" Chin Mo tucked her hair behind her ear and smiled slowly. "You don't agree? You said we are lovers, but you can't even do this?" Bojo looked at him, her eyes clear and intelligent. "If that's what you want, I can do it." With that, she turned. She met the eyes of the person standing at the front of the boat without giving any orders. Before Bojo could speak, a voice came from the other side. "Chin Mo has to go back with us. Someone will handle the rest." This was a direct rejection of everything Bojo wanted to say. Since that was the case, "Young Master Tang, you should know that I won't hand him over to the military in his current state." Bojo knew that even if she returned with them, the Almighty would receive proper arrangements. But psychologically, or perhaps, the outcome would be the same as before. Chin Mo wasn't suited to have a military rank anymore. Out of consideration for everyone's safety, they would allow him to return to Jiang City. He had done so many things. He didn't hesitate to give up his favorite esports. He allowed himself to fall into such a predicament once again. In the end, he could only receive such treatment, because he was no longer the Chin Mo of the past. The military wasn't wrong. He was too dangerous now. If Kwang could hypnotize someone in a short period of time. But now, he had all the abilities to control people's hearts. Anti-reconnaissance, combat ability, long-range sniping, even the basic reactions of his body. He was incomparably familiar with the military's tactics. Once he turned dark, the military would definitely be wary of him. Other than herself, Bojo didn't trust anyone else. She was afraid that they would treat him as a psychopath like Kwang, and raise him in a place where he wouldn't have to worry about food or clothing, but wouldn't be able to escape. That wasn't her pet. Her pet had been a little prince since he was young. Arrogant, disdainful, and righteous. He was the most suitable person to be a god. He should have been spotless. How could she allow them to treat him like a virus and isolate him, regardless of the method? "I want to bring him away." Bojo looked at the figure and smiled slowly. "If we can't resolve this peacefully, I have other methods. I believe young Master Tang wouldn't want to be my enemy." The figure didn't move, his tone calm. "Z, Have you ever thought about the consequences of bringing him away? The military will put you on the wanted list, but that isn't important. More importantly, are you sure he doesn't have any ulterior motives? You should be aware of the danger he is in now. Perhaps, the moment you bring him away, he will control you to do whatever he wants. Chinemo smiled. He hadn't expected such a smart person to be in front of him. It seemed like his plan wasn't going to succeed. I can bear any consequences. I've said it before this time. It's my turn to bring him home. Chinemo trembled when he heard this. He looked at the youngster very slowly. There were other thoughts in his bottomless eyes. This meant that this youngster had known about his plan. That was why she had said, "If that's what you want, you can have it." She had clearly sensed that he was up to no good. She had to agree to his request. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.